So we now move on to our second session of today, which is a panel discussion. In the session, we're really going to be cutting through the hype. We're going to be discussing some real-life case studies and uses of AI and machine learning and automation within healthcare. As we all know, we hear it every day here at Corinium. There is so much talk around digital transformation, so much talk around emerging tech, and so much talk around AI and machine learning that it can often be quite overwhelming. It feels like a minefield of buzzwords. It feels like everybody's doing this, but we're not. So today we're going to talk on a very strategic and a very practical level on how you can use these emerging technologies for real impact in your business. Joining me today, I have a fantastic panel of analytics, data science, and digital transformation experts who have been at the coalface of this issue for some time within healthcare, and I know that all of them have some fantastic insights to share. So I'd like to quickly welcome the panelists. We will then jump to a polling question for you, the audience, and then we'll jump into the content. So joining me today, we have Daniel Crowley, who is the Director of Strategic Analytics at Steward Healthcare. We have Justin Smith, who is the Senior Director of Advanced Analytics at St. Luke's Health System. We have Hanqing, who is the Head of Data Science in the IT Transformation Department at York-Presbyterian Hospital. And we also have Vishal Sheth, who is the Director of Transformation at York-Presbyterian Hospital as well. So I will let the panelists introduce themselves in just a moment. But before we do that, would love to kick things off with just a quick polling question to better understand your perspective and where you are coming from in your organizations when it comes to the maturity of your AI journeys. So what I'd like to know is simply how mature is your organization's AI and automation journey? Is it in the planning phases? Is it less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 4 years, or more than 5 years? And we'll give you just a few moments to answer that whilst we get the panelists ready. And then we'll look at the results and we will jump straight in to the questions. Just leave that for a few more seconds, just so we get some good results there. And my colleague Delia will then reveal the results for us. Okay, so it looks as though here we've got 14% in the planning phase, not yet started. Nobody is at less than a year. The majority of the audience, 42.9%, 1 to 2 years, which is interesting. 2 to 4 years, 28.6%, and more than 5 years, just 14.3% of you are that far into the journey, which was very, very interesting. So hopefully everybody here will get some great insights from our panelists, regardless of which level you are on in your journey. I know that everybody's journey is very, very different. So thank you very much for that. We will come back to our polling facility later on in the panel discussion. But right now, I'd like to turn over to our panelists. So first of all, thank you everybody for joining. You'll get a chance in just a moment to introduce yourselves and your journeys, and I will stop talking. So the first question, although not quite a question, is really, would you mind taking us on a very quick whistle-stop tour of your organization's AI journey and where you found the greatest successes so far? And Daniel, if I can go to you first on that question.
Sure. Thank you so much for the introduction, Adam. So as you shared, I'm the Director of Strategic Analysis at Steward Healthcare. What that means is I manage a small team of 5 data scientists, and we handle essentially what is labeled as the impossible asks. And like many of you, our company, I would say, is fairly young, in our automation and machine learning and AI journey. And because of that, a lot of our business units analytics operate within silos. And so what I would really just kind of adequate to the impossible ask is generally when the ask requires information to be gleaned from those disparate silos. So coming on board in the organization, it was really clear that the organization was interested in analytics and machine learning and AI. I mean, they made it readily apparent that that's where they wanted to move, as well as I feel like we had all of the tools. We had, Data Robot, Alteryx, Tableau, Click, Power BI. We had a couple of open source web front end units that were, coding in JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. So I think about the only thing that I haven't seen yet is Domo, but honestly, it could exist, and I just haven't seen it yet. The abundance of this, or what I would allocate it to, is because we made a bunch of acquisitions relatively quickly, and with those acquisitions, of course, came the products that those teams were already leveraging, and posed issues with them, essentially accessing data from different EMRs in different front-end applications. So one of the biggest issues that we had up front was just standardization issues and misalignment on definitions. We lacked a true EDW. We didn't have a data governance group set up yet, and we were misaligned on a lot of what the key priorities were going to be. So as a lot of you know, bad data in, bad data out. And because of those issues then, where we've had some really great successes, is just aligning senior leadership and getting them to standardize definitions, which of course can be a painful process and requires a lot of time with the CFOs, the COOs, and the regional CEOs. But we've aligned on a lot of those definitions now. We've aligned on the tools that we believe that our analyst group or analytic groups can work with, as well as we've started aligning those business units so that there's less of a silo mentality, and we're exposing them, to information across EMRs. So they're getting a lot more exposure into gaining data from multiple places, as well as because we've put so much work into standardizing our definitions and then training, our analytics groups. We've had some really great models that have come out of the top of it. We have a claim denial model. We have a length of stay model, detecting change in DRG models. We have several models that, predict outcomes of marketing campaigns before we initiate them, of course. We have a model that helps us with identifying turnover, predicting future revenue, PO spend. PO spend, of course, was a very interesting one because, obviously we know that from our supply chain side of the world that what we are ordering for supplies is closely correlated to surgical case volume. And that was a big obstacle for us because obviously I was referencing those silos. And while we had groups that focused on surgeon case volume, we didn't have groups that, and we had groups that focused on supply chain. Neither one really knew how to find essentially a primary key to join that data in order for us to grab good information. What else? I mean, we have a number of models that we've been able to do just because of that standardization, as well as we have set up at least what I would call the initial stages of a really good EDW and started designing data marts and giving those individual groups direct access to quote Chris Hutchins earlier, that way essentially our analysts don't feel like that they're going fishing in the ocean. They can directly query, what information is going to be pivotal to what they're supposed to be looking for. We've aligned on visualization tools and what we're going to be leveraging. And then, of course, we've our group has Data Robot available to us, but we also use some open source applications, when a model essentially skews away from Data Robot. And of course, in parallel, then, we've also started a data governance group and a group that collaborates with our charge master dictionary to make sure that anytime that there is essentially a change in definition from a medical standpoint, that all of the reporting outlets are essentially updated. So we always have that apples to apples comparison across the org.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And we will come back to a number of those points that you've just raised as we work our way through. It'd be great now to turn to Hanqing, actually, to get your view on this as well. The journey you guys have been on at New York-Presbyterian Hospital. What does AI mean to your organization right now?
Thank you, Adam, for your question. And so my role is try to lead this team to deliver projects in the both operational side as well as the clinical side. So this journey we started at NYP actually is from the revenue cycle projects, where we were able to identify a very small and while a big project, small meaning that it would only impact a small number of stakeholders, and it's lightweight to develop. Big meaning that organization financially is very big. And after that, we were successful, then kicked off. And so we hired a number of data scientists to continue our journey with the AI, clinical applications such as malnutrition screening tool, heart failure, as well as continue with the journey for the revenue cycle projects, such as I go to what Dan said, like now management and outpatient conversion, etc. And so I think that my for this kind of journey would be first is try to understand the need of an organization and try to come up with a small angle that you can get in quickly so that you can get the buy-in at the beginning. Once you're successful in one project, people will come to you and will resort to you as data experts or data science experts, and then they would trust you to develop good projects for them. So the need is abundant. It's just like we need a special eye to be creative so that we can identify them and address them accordingly. That's my experience so far. Thank you.
Fantastic. And you've touched on something there that we will come to in the next question, actually. And I know Chris mentioned this earlier, which is success breeding success and kind of how you win that business internally. And I'd love to go back to that very, very shortly. So Justin, it'd be great again to get your perspective, because again, we're already hearing there's different approaches to AI in different organizations. It means different things. For you guys, over there at St. Luke's, what does it mean?
No, absolutely. I think part of it is understanding where you are in the process, where in the journey that we have. The point we're going to talk about later is kind of how does this come about, or how do you again drum up business, or how do you solicit the customer. How we're organized is, so I'm over our data science team. We call it the Advanced Analytics team. We're part of kind of a three-legged stool in the sense where we work hand in hand with our business intelligence group, all within the same department, in our data management group. And within data management, we have data governance and also master data management. And so the idea is, I was brought in about a year ago now to kind of help take the organization from reporting that we've been going on for a while, really focus on data management. We have the whole group that does that. And then to layer on top of that advanced analytics and machine learning with the end goal of getting to AI here in the next couple of years. But we've had a great success thus far. I like to refer to things now as pre and during COVID times. So we're having some small successes pre-COVID. And then during the COVID pandemic, we've had tremendous success, actually. And so as a lead in kind of the next question, we're not having any troubles right now soliciting new projects, or where individuals want to try to apply machine learning to see how we can automate things or make it so that we can project and predict into the future.
Fantastic. And finally, Vishal, it'd be great just to get your sort of opening remarks here, I guess, the journey that you've been on, of course, in the same organization as Hanqing, but from a sort of different perspective somewhat.
Yeah, thanks so much, Adam. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vishal Sheth. I'm Director of Transformation at York-Presbyterian Hospital. Just to kind of give people some scale of York-Presbyterian, if you're not familiar with it. The New York-Presbyterian is essentially a 10-hospital system located in New York, affiliated with two renowned institutions, Weill Cornell and Columbia. We're ranked top 5 in the nation, and we're an organization that is made up of almost 45,000 employees and generating a revenue of $8 billion or so. So just to give you some perspective, when you think about operating at scale, that's precisely what we're doing at New York-Presbyterian. So I oversee our transformation efforts across the entire enterprise. That includes AI, automation, robotics, mobile, web dev, and a whole host of different kind of technology stack. Just to kind of give you a quick overview of where our journey started and where we're now. So as an organization, we started dabbling into the technology, perhaps I want to say maybe, sometime in 2017. One of the first projects we started out was AI-based software to help optimize patient flow throughout the system. And obviously that's something that as all healthcare institutions care about tremendously. Given some of the early successes we saw over there in Q1 of 2018, we made a big bet of establishing an entire program around this. So we deployed a handful of RPA initiatives. And since then, now we have about a portfolio of 35 plus different AI initiatives that we have ongoing. And that has also resulted in tremendous growth from the team as well, going from 3 to 4 people to now almost a team made up of 40 people, comprising of 4 disciplines. So as Hanqing mentioned, data science is one of those disciplines. The second one is program management, that is inclusive of project managers and process engineers, so on and so forth. Third is essentially the development team. So as I said, a number of different technology stack that we have. So we have developers for that. And the fourth is the clinical team. So essentially clinical expertise. Depending on the nature of the project, we're either leveraging them for their knowledge, expertise, and from domain expertise standpoint, or if it's actual clinical project, having them be also act in the PM capacity. So as an organization, we've been on a really, really good journey, and certainly we've seen a lot of tremendous growth. So we look forward to kind of sharing more about that as the conversation progresses.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. Again, very evident how different the journeys are, which I think is one of the great things about this topic, because the audience, I'm sure your journeys are very, very different as well. And the applications of AI probably vary between that frontline clinical and the back office operations as well. So as I mentioned, I guess the next question that I wanted to ask you guys, feeding off what a couple of you have mentioned and Chris earlier on today, and something we hear a lot is that data analytics leaders have to almost operate like an internal consultant, and they have to kind of win the trust and then win the business of key stakeholders. So you've all kind of alluded to it in some way, but I guess in the early stages, how did you guys go about winning business within your organization? And how did you identify opportunities, perhaps quite small in the beginning, to put AI to work, which then provided that platform for further success and further business? And actually, I think, Hanqing, it'd be great to start with you on this one, because it's something you alluded to in your opening quite strongly.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that in order to identify the need, first, is, as Chris mentioned, is ROI. Everybody asks about ROI, right? And it turns out, just like New York City is abundant of financial services, right? But that's where the money comes, I shouldn't say easiest, but like with the money-wise, it's more relevant compared to clinical projects. So that's why we started with revenue cycle projects, aiming to gain money first, like get a big ROI first. And it turns out that inpatient data and inpatient claims are a big chunk of money resolved. Like it's a majority of the money comes, revenue from the company for the organization comes from the inpatient services. So we start with the clinical appeal projects, where we were able to improve the success rate for the clinical appeal for like double digits, as in the training that shows. And which translate to more than $10 million a year. So that's how we started. And in order to actually convince get the buy-in for the business stakeholders is, as I said before, it's like start with small, because it would only impact a small group of people who are going to write the appeal letters. And next is that the impact is big. And the third one is that the changes is small. It's just like you only try to assign the cases to different nurses. So nurses even don't have to be aware that their assignments is different from previous assignment. So the changes from the organization perspective is very small. And we did it very quickly, and so we were very successful. And so another thing was that to learn about was that after we get buy-in and still we have to constantly connect it and communicate with the stakeholders so that they are sure that our numbers from training data or our analytics are trustworthy. To be honest with you, I'd say, oh, we're a million, like we're going to get $20 million. Are you crazy? Are you sure? Right? So that's like there's we have to constantly show them like the data shows this. We have to develop this culture of data-driven strategy, methodology, so that they can really understand and accept our methodologies. That's how we started with this buy-in.
Fantastic, thank you. Justin, any thoughts around this? How did you guys go about getting this business and get the ball rolling, so to speak?
No, absolutely. And I think that's something where, again, about a year ago, it took a few months to get the team in place. And during that time, my goal was to go around the organization, speak with other leaders, and basically do a very much hands-on, elbow-to-elbow, on-the-ground pitch job to say, look, this is what the future that we're going to, the team that we're putting into place, and these are going to be the capabilities that we have. And in doing so, I think I was able to kind of at least do some of that groundwork education to describe what is predictive or prescriptive modeling, how does machine learning work, what it is and what it is not. Even as of recently, I had somebody ask me, so you can't build a model if you don't have any data? And I had to pause, take a deep breath, and say, no, we need to have data so we can build a model. Without data, we're writing opinion papers. I can do that all day long, but that's not what we're here for. And then from that is the idea of building trust and showing our customers that what we're delivering is impactful. This is how it's impactful, so we can build that trust. And then once you have that trust established, again, it's kind of the idea of you don't want to advertise too fast, too soon, because then you get a slew of events and requests, and not everybody's going to be happy because you can't fulfill them all. One of the examples that we used right away was to do some very quick automation, and it was for our oncology clinical trials matching. We were able to take this manual process and with very light machine learning, take this manual process that humans had to go through roughly 4,000 or 5,000 charts every 2 or 3 weeks to try and review them, down to matching them with the top 100 best potential matches for a clinical trial. And so it took this team's workload down considerably, but their success rate up tremendously. And so just from that, we've been able to say, here's some of the small impacts we can have with, again, very light machine learning work. And once that starts to go, you get that snowball effect where it starts to build on itself. And then to fast forward to today, where we're in the middle of COVID, and we've got requests coming out of our ears right now because everybody wants a piece of the small team. But yeah, it's a very interesting journey. I think that's the education and trust are things I can't highlight enough. And it's the idea where trust is hard to build and hard to earn. And once you earn it, you have to keep it, because if you lose it, it's more or less gone forever. And so that's something where I talk a lot about that with all our customers and end users, in the sense of if you don't trust me, it seems off, let me know immediately. We can go back and work on it together, or work on some education.
Fantastic. So money talks is the first example we had, and then with you, it's about winning trust and myth busting to some extent as well. Vishal, what's your view on this? I guess where does your experience lie in this matter?
No, I think both both of them, both Hanqing and Justin made a really good point, and in terms of what are some of the things that you need to do on a tactical level to ensure you build that trust and build from ground up. So maybe let me kind of take a step back and speak more broadly then, and provide perhaps a different point of view. From a project level, there's so many different things we can do, and I think we've talked about that. One of the other things that we were also particularly concerned about is how do we ensure viability of the program itself, essentially the services that we're providing, right? In order for us to actually deliver on it, we have to make sure we exist, right? So we had a very deliberate programmatic approach on this, and not only executing on the projects and building a portfolio from the ground up with the business owners we work with, but in addition to that, also think about what are some of the things we need to do from a programmatic standpoint, and what are some of the strategies we need to deploy to make sure that we exist 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, and then fundamentally we become part of this new way of operating organizations. So when people think of applications of AI and some of these other emerging technologies in healthcare, their first thought always tends to be clinical care. And yes, clinical care is really important, and that's a critical part of it, not the biggest part of what a healthcare institution does. The reality is there isn't that much, although we're working on it, there aren't that many use cases out there, right? And the technology hasn't developed to a certain extent where you can do every single thing that you kind of desire to do so. So what we felt was really important for us to ensure sustainability and viability of the program was, let's focus on the other side of the hospital that is perhaps just as important, which is the administrative and financial processes, which I alluded to, right? That supports that clinical care. And because there are a lot of low-hanging fruits there, things can be easily quantified, from a financial standpoint or from an operational standpoint. We felt that was probably the best way to build our business case and continue to grow the team. And as we've gone through that process, what has also allowed us to do is it has allowed us to build credibility, because it's because of the discrete things that you can tackle on the administrative and financial side versus perhaps clinical side, and especially if your organization is not aware of these concepts, introducing these types of concepts to a clinician who has dedicated 15 to 20 years of their life, and all of a sudden you're providing a recommendation, and they have a hard time explaining how you're coming up with these recommendations, and or because as a result of your recommendation, perhaps there's unintended consequences, the risks are extremely high. So by going through that angle first, we're able to build a lot of credibility and buy-in across the organization. And then since then, obviously, that has also opened a lot of doors for us on the clinical care side as well. So that's been the deliberate approach we've taken. And then what kind of wraps this entire thing up is, as long as we're able to continue to deliver value, right, whether it's a financial value, quality metrics or clinical impact, et cetera, we can continue to justify the venture into different areas that perhaps we may not get exposed to and take further and further risks.
Fantastic. And Daniel, just sort of a last word, I guess, on this point. You entered an organization that had a lot of technology tools, perhaps maybe thought they knew what they were doing, but I guess how did you go and get the business and actually have a real impact?
Honestly, I think my peers have done a really good job of highlighting, how to gain that interest. I mean, the only other thing that I would essentially add to that is I kind of always say yes. Google is essentially my team's best friend. So inevitably, I always think that there's a will or a way. Whether or not IS is going to support it is always going to be a different conversation. Because you always have to make sure that the solutions that you're creating can be supported and they're scalable long term. But sometimes you can come up with some quick solutions that may give your organization enough time to develop knowledge in a way to support that solution. And so because of that, I wouldn't say that all of the projects we take on are home runs or grand slams by any means. But just essentially saying yes and then getting the ability to evaluate the project and dig through the data to see where the biggest obstacles are, and then coming back to essentially senior leadership and just kind of saying, hey, look, like these are the reasons why we can do this, and these are the reasons why there may be some issues, right, in order to set expectations, and then at least being able to deliver on what you're committing to.
I like that. I would never say no to an opportunity, but manage the expectations. I like that a lot. Fantastic. So thank you, guys. What I'd like to quickly do now, actually, is just move to another polling question, just to get the room's opinion on this issue. We've kind of talked about the successes and how you can have a real impact, but something that we all know is that there are a lot of challenges to this stuff. So we would love to know, people in the audience, what is the number one roadblock when attempting to implement emerging technologies such as AI and machine learning in your organizations? And we'd love to get your thoughts on that. We've got some options here: budget constraints, executive buy-in, stakeholder buy-in, legacy system / integration, or other. And again, we'll give you just a few moments to sort of share your views on that. We'll take a look at the results, and then I'd like to turn the panel's attention to overcoming some of those challenges that we will probably uncover from the poll. So we'll give you just a few moments to complete that. And whilst I do, it's probably a good time as any to remind you to please send in your questions throughout the panel discussion. We've got a lot of ground that we can cover in this topic, and we'd love to get a chance to answer your questions as well. So please do submit them. And in the final kind of 10, 15 minutes of the session, we'll do our best to answer those as well. Okay, so I think we can probably take a look at the results now. Okay, looks like we're just getting some loading there, but we've got a lot in favor of legacy systems and integration, which is interesting, and stakeholder buy-in comes in just after that, significantly behind. I think budget constraints and executive buy-in, not the primary roadblock in your organizations, but I'd probably like to hazard a guess that it's maybe close second or third in some cases. Thank you for that. We can always revisit those results in just a moment. I know that you guys are probably still voting on there, but I'd like to turn the panel's attention actually to these challenges that people are seeing. We know that sort of top level challenges often hinder the success of these implementations. Or digital transformation in general, whether it's executive buy-in, which we had listed there, a battle for funding, challenges around sunken costs in the existing technological infrastructure, which we've touched on there. which obviously ties into integration as well. So how have you overcome some of these bigger picture challenges, the executive buy-in, the funding, and the current technological infrastructure? Justin, let's start with you. What one's sort of top of your list?
No, I think this is my response probably be very unique. Our whole department was up 2 years.
We're just losing you a little bit there, Justin. I think if you could just come a little bit closer to your mic, I reckon we'll get you there. But just dropped you for a second. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, if you could just. Yeah.
I'll hold my microphone in my mouth. I think my response will probably be a little bit different in the sense that our whole department was stood up to do this exact purpose roughly 2 years ago, with the idea of funding being put into place, with the expectation of being able to deliver within 24 to 36 months, which we're now in that time frame as well. And so the executive buy-in was there from the start. Funding was already put into place. And I think one of the things I spend a lot of time now to make sure, again, going back to the idea of trust, is explaining what is machine learning and what is it not. And so one of the big points that I really drive home is machine learning and AI, it will never supersede human critical thinking or with our clinicians, clinical judgment. So it's another tool in the toolbox, but it's not the end-all be-all to help with that. Where we have excellent success, again, as in operations and kind of the back-end clinical automation pieces, we can have these large gains, but when done well, it integrates very quickly and seamlessly with the decisions that are being made and helps to optimize that part of the performance. Again, one of the roadblocks that we're facing now is, as much as I think that we're educating, we still have much more to do. And so we're getting a lot of questions on why is it telling us this, or how does this model work? And these are from individuals that have the best intentions, but perhaps haven't had a math or statistics class, definitely not a machine learning class ever. And so kind of just explaining from a very foundational level up to build and maintain that trust. And again, I try and make sure I'm transparent as possible, saying if any of this is confusing and you're afraid to ask in a meeting, you have my email address and my numbers on there as well. So you can contact me anytime, and I'm happy to explain it as much as possible. And again, there's no bad questions. I want to make sure I bring everybody along with this journey, because one of the other things I like to talk about is the language that for what we do, even in data in general, there's no language for it in any language. So in English, in any language you like to pick, we're making this up as we go. And so we do a lot of explaining via the whiteboard. And one of the things I coach my team to ask is, what is the decision that you're trying to make, or what is the action you're going to take from that decision? And if we can't come to that with our customers or our stakeholders, then the answer is probably, this is not a problem that we should be solving right now. It's a nice to know, not a need to know. And so we try and steer the conversation back to those clinical and operational moments. But I think those are, from the barriers perspective, I'm in a much different position than a lot of other systems that have much more established legacy systems that are fighting through. So I feel very fortunate in that sense.
Fantastic, thank you, Vishal. How does that stack up with your experiences? What's the perspective here?
Very similar to kind of what Justin described. The reason why we exist is precisely, the reason why our transformation group exists is precisely to tackle these challenges head on and create that larger cultural change. So it's actually fundamentally built into our program objectives. So let me kind of spend a minute quickly talking about what those objectives are and how it tackles each of these kind of issues that we come across. So one goal of our program is to democratize the technology across the enterprise. And what that essentially means is that I fundamentally believe that limitation of these technologies is not necessarily the technical wherewithal, but rather people not having intuitive understanding of how to leverage these tools. At the end of the day, these are just tools, albeit much smarter tools. So by making sure that it's not necessarily just a select group of people that are working on this, but rather there's a larger cultural transformation change that's happening across the organization. And in order to do that, we have to bring as I mentioned, 45,000 employee base all along with us, rather than 40 to 50 people, right, that's working on it. The second goal is we want to tackle some of the fundamental problems that we have as an organization that we haven't been able to solve through traditional means. That in itself creates a lot of executive buy-in and ties into the overall strategy of the organization. We take a very pragmatic approach that we don't want to be technology-driven. We want to be problem-driven. So depending on what the problem is, what we typically say is, you just tell us the problem. We'll figure out from people, process, technology standpoint what kind of solution we need to put together. Let us kind of own that side of it. And the third goal is essentially anything and everything we do has to have clear, tangible benefit in our operations. Our goal is not to be an R&D. And certainly, a portion of the portfolio that we have is going to be, where there are going to be higher risk projects we take on. But our commitment always is, overall, as a portfolio, we need to deliver some level of clear return on it. So what that means is that, just to kind of give you some perspective, for our organization, we're generating $25 to $30 million, net value as a result of the program, minus all the costs, labor that goes into it, and creating ROI of around 400% or so. So by creating that type of framework and that type of discipline, it has allowed us to overcome a lot of these challenges.
Fantastic, thank you. Again, all about ROI. We hear it all the time, but it makes complete sense. Daniel, would love to get your thoughts on this as well. What are the top level challenges you guys are seeing?
Inevitably, when it's going to be the executive buy-in, I usually think that it's just a matter of communication. I'm a big believer in that if you can't explain something simply, then you should probably read it a few more times, just so that you can break it down to someone to give them a really good understanding of what you're trying to do. AI is often perceived as essentially a black box, and I think to Justin's point, it's really important to know when to leverage that and when it's appropriate to leverage it versus, maybe where a more simple forecasting could be more appropriate, and breaking that down to leadership so that they have a good understanding of why or why not as well. Right. What I would just say is that, from a leadership perspective, it's just as important, for our mentors to be teaching downwards, but not necessarily if they have the same expertise, being able to bring them along for the ride with your expertise as well. Moreover, from that, when it's an ROI perspective, or, it may be a limitation in funding, I'm a giant proponent of open source. And generally from what I've essentially experienced is, regardless if there's a number of legacy systems, there's a way to essentially port or gain that data and pipeline it so that you can aggregate it and access it in a relatively quick fashion. So again, where there's a will, there's a way.
Fantastic, thank you. And Hanqing, anything to add? I know obviously you work closely with Vishal, but anything from your perspective on the data science angle that kind of would like to share here?
Yes, thank you. I echo all the panelists' challenges. Looks like we are facing very common challenges. And also I'd like to add one thing, which is the poll says about the legacy or the system issue, data issue. Actually, we had come across a unique situation where NYP is trying to integrate or replace existing EMR with the Epic system, which makes that very complex for the whole organization enterprise-wise. That, for example, we have existing products like machine learning algorithm in production, then we have to basically maintenance two different sets of the data from different systems. And unfortunately, you cannot just map one data item from Epic to the other because they don't necessarily translate all together, or they don't necessarily have the equivalent meaning or data piece. So in that end, we actually planned it many months earlier in order to anticipate what kind of problems we should have and how should we address them accordingly. And we also work very closely with the Epic team as well as with the existing medical systems team, and so that we can you hear me? So that we can try to address the data issues. And then so that we ended up have two parallel systems working on getting the data and then using them to feed into the model and then get the results so that we can send to the end users so that they can use them in the consistent way. So that is, I think, that is ongoing process as NYP is integrating. So far as we have finished integrating Epic for West Campus, but East Campus still on the old system. And yeah, that's the challenge we're facing right now. And on top of all the challenges the other panelists have covered.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for those insights. Really fascinating, actually, how the challenges, they're uniform to an extent, but there's obviously a difference there per organisation once again. We have just around 8 minutes to go until we need to wrap up, so I'd love to move to a couple of audience questions that we've had come through. So the first one here, so how do you approach training new machine learning engineers? And Vishal, we'll hit that one to you first.
If you don't mind, let me punt that to Hanqing. I think it's for the data scientists to talk about that. But just broadly speaking, I can just kind of describe the theme, right? So this is one of the reasons I was mentioning earlier. It was really important for us, and it was a very deliberate way for us to develop these core disciplines. So that way, as you add more resources in these core disciplines, you essentially are creating this very collaborative environment and building that expertise in-house. So from a technical standpoint, our goal is to build really good core groups, right? And then as you onboard more people, just because of the existing talent that you have, you can bring those things up. But I'll let Hanqing speak specifically on what those things look like.
Hanqing, it'd be fantastic to get your view on that.
Oh, hi, sure. So I think that for machine learning engineers, I think I trust their machine learning aspect. However, I think most of them do not necessarily have the background of the upskill domain knowledge as well as business knowledge. So I think in order for them to understand the business problems and also the clinical problems, then they have to build them up. So the way we do is we do it by learning. So we sit side by side with the business partners, clinical clinicians, and to understand what their problem is. And then we try to see that how we can approach them so that we can provide a solution that can be used by them, so that in a sense that it's usable, it's feasible, and it's user-friendly. So I can give one example, which is that about malnutrition, where we were approached by this nutrition department by asking us to do malnutrition identification. And what we did is that we actually went with them side by side their desk, look at their so understand their workflow. So what it looks like. Okay, so this is my workflow, and this is where my headache comes from. And then so that if you can help me with remove the headache, then I would be very helpful for me. And then we go back and look at the data and see what kind of data we should collect in order to do that, if it's appropriate for machine learning algorithms. And then we started to build up our prototypes and then try to get the algorithms up and running. And so during the process, that there's a lot of data integration, lots of the back and forth learning from the business partners, and as well as trying to constantly asking their needs, if this is what you want. If this is, we have small tick here, is this you like? Like we try to check their need as much as we can. In the meantime, we're being creative that we probably will propose or anticipate, oh, what if we do this? Do you like this way? Even if they probably have not thought about. And usually they will say, oh yeah, I have not thought about, that's a good idea. So this is how we kind of training. I'm not sure it's working like training by doing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. It's fascinating. I know Chris mentioned this earlier today as well, but the power of just proximity, having the data science alongside the clinical side, alongside the business side, and being around each other every day is so powerful. Daniel, any thoughts to add to this in terms of machine learning engineer training, but also more broadly, upskilling your teams?
Sure. So it may be a little bit of a different scenario for me because when I'm not at Steward Healthcare, I teach data science at Southern Methodist University. And it's a 6-month cohort essentially to where we take individuals from, conditional formatting in Excel and we move them into machine learning and AI and big data. So usually when it comes to grabbing new hires, I'm cherry picking from, one of my last cohorts. But I think that the principles are fundamentally the same in that you really need to make things essentially easy to understand, and things that you can do within the organization to handle onboarding easily is documenting your processes, giving people exposure to what your tools are, whether or not that's going to be SQL Server or MongoDB or whatever you may be using to giving them exposure, working with another individual to kind of not necessarily handhold them, but kind of help them along in the process. And then more or less setting them up with success with managing expectations in regards to what you expect from them. So early on in machine learning, I think it's really important to start recognizing which models should be utilized with what types of data sets and how to do feature selection. But then once you've gotten into it for a little bit, then the process for your ETL and auto ML options become relatively routine. Not to say that every one of your machine learning models is going to be exactly the same, but I know that when I'm addressing or approaching a model, I have a very stepwise approach that I like to share with other individuals within the organization, just to kind of say, look, this is the way that I do things. Not that it's necessarily the best way by any means, but it usually works for me to get me pretty close. And then from there, I can do some parameter tuning to see what else I can get. So I guess just education, being easily approachable, and then having documentation available for your employees.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And then finally, Justin, just sort of 60 seconds on this. Anything that, springs to mind in terms of how you are approaching the upskill challenge in your organization as well?
No, I think this is a very important point. Consider how do you kind of grow that next set and continue to grow the individuals that you have currently in your organization. One of the things that's been successful in addition to what everybody else has already mentioned, documentation, continuing education, onboarding, is we try, and I work very hard to make sure I set up appropriate and people that are excited to show off their specialized areas. And we do basically, think about them as site visits. So you get to go out and see, what does the children's pavilion look like? How do these things that we see in formats of zeros and ones and data elements, how do they look in real life, and what are the nurses and physicians, how are they touching and feeling and looking at that? A good example is with COVID. We had a massive order of N95 masks, and there were some that were a little bit hard to get accounted for, and one of my team members, data scientists, went out and just did an understanding of what the supply chain's going through, and he's like, they are literally hiding those under people's desks right now, and so we can't account for them if they're not tracking them accurately because they're being hidden so that they're in such high demand. But those are the things that you get from experiencing on the ground information and collecting it that way, as well as from the big data perspective.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So I think we have reached time. It's absolutely flown by, the panel discussion. I don't know where the time has gone, but unfortunately we do have to wrap up. I know lots of people have got lots of work to be doing, so I'm conscious of time.